My name is Madeline Reynolds, and I'm 32 years old. 2 weeks after burying my parents, I sat in their lawyer's mahogany-paneled office, expecting a standard will reading. My brother Alexander and I had always been close growing up, so the tension in his shoulders seemed odd. When Mr. Hoffman, our family attorney for 20 years, couldn't meet my eyes, my stomach dropped. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The manila folder he slid across his desk would shatter everything I thought I knew about my family. If you're watching this, I'd love to know where you're from. Hit subscribe and like while I tell you how I discovered the betrayal that changed my life forever. Growing up in a modest colonial home in Boston's suburbs, I never wanted for anything important. My parents, Robert and Eleanor Reynolds, weren't wealthy by any means, but Dad's accounting practice and Mom's career as a high school English teacher provided us with a stable, middle-class upbringing. Our neighborhood was the kind where kids played outside until streetlights came on, where block parties happened every 4th of July, and where neighbors actually knew each other's names. Alexander was 4 years older than me, the golden boy who excelled at everything he touched. Captain of the debate team, varsity baseball player, and class president, he cast a long shadow. But rather than feeling competitive, I admired him. He was the one who taught me to ride a bike, who helped me with algebra homework, who threatened to have a talk with my first boyfriend. We were different, he was methodical and traditional, while I was creative and independent, but our differences complemented each other. I remember the day I told my parents I'd been accepted to Northwestern University in Chicago. Mom's eyes had flickered with something, pride mixed with what I now recognize was worry, while Dad had simply nodded and said, "That's far from home, Maddie." Alexander had already decided to attend Boston College, living at home to save money, a decision my parents had openly celebrated. "Chicago is where the best journalism program is," I'd explained, determined to follow my dream of becoming an investigative journalist. "And they're offering me a partial scholarship." My parents had exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret before Mom had said, "We're proud of you, honey. We've always known you'd fly the farthest." That became the pattern of our relationship. While Alexander stayed local, eventually joining Dad's accounting firm and marrying his high school sweetheart Catherine, I built a life in Chicago. I worked my way up from fact-checker to feature writer at the Chicago Tribune, eventually specializing in corporate corruption investigations. My work was demanding and consuming, often requiring weeks of travel for a single story. The physical distance inevitably created emotional distance too. While I called home weekly, my visits became less frequent: Christmas, sometimes Thanksgiving, occasionally a summer weekend. Alexander, meanwhile, had Sunday dinner with our parents every week without fail. He bought a house just 3 streets over from our childhood home. When Mom had minor surgery for gallstones 5 years ago, he was the one who drove her to appointments and picked up prescriptions. "You don't need to come home for this, Maddie," Mom had insisted when I'd offered to take time off work. "It's just routine, and Alexander is here. You focus on that big story you're working on." The last time I saw my parents alive was 3 months before their death. I'd flown in for a long weekend, and we'd had a pleasant if somewhat reserved time together. Dad seemed quieter than usual, and Mom kept changing the subject whenever I asked about their health. Looking back, there were signs something was off, but I'd attributed it to them getting older. Dad was 68 and Mom 66. "You should come home more," Alexander had said when he dropped me at the airport. "They miss you more than they let on." "I know," I'd replied, feeling the familiar guilt. "I'll try to visit again soon." But soon never came. 3 weeks ago, I received a call from Alexander, his voice hollow and strange. "There's been an accident," he said. "Mom and Dad, their car went off Lakeside Road during that big storm. They didn't make it, Maddie." The funeral was a blur of black clothes, somber faces, and platitudes that meant nothing in the face of such sudden loss. I noticed Alexander kept his distance, speaking to me only when necessary and always with an undercurrent of tension I couldn't understand. When I tried to discuss funeral arrangements or our parents' affairs, he deflected, saying only that everything was taken care of and that we would need to meet with Hoffman afterward. I assumed his coldness was grief. We all process loss differently, after all. But when Mr. Hoffman called to schedule the reading of the will, saying, "There are some matters we need to discuss regarding your parents' estate," Alexander's response, a quick, almost satisfied nod, gave me my first real inkling that something was very wrong. The morning of the will reading dawned cold and gray, appropriate for the heaviness in my chest. I'd been staying at my parents' house, technically now our house, I assumed, in my old bedroom that Mom had maintained exactly as I'd left it for college, down to the framed journalism award from high school and the faded poster of the Chicago skyline that had once represented my dreams. I wore a simple black dress and arrived at Hoffman Legal Associates 10 minutes early, expecting to meet Alexander there. The receptionist, a woman I didn't recognize, directed me to the conference room where Mr. Hoffman was already waiting, his silver hair perfectly coiffed as always, though new lines etched his face. "Madeline," he said, rising to shake my hand with a grip that felt tentative, almost apologetic. "Please, have a seat. Alexander should be here shortly." The conference room was exactly what you'd expect from a successful suburban law firm: dark wood table, leather chairs, abstract art in muted colors, and the subtle scent of lemon polish. I sat rigidly, hands folded in my lap, stomach churning with a combination of grief and inexplicable anxiety. When Alexander finally arrived, 5 minutes late, the subtle smirk playing at the corners of his mouth sent a chill through me. He was dressed immaculately in a tailored suit that seemed brand new, his wedding ring glinting as he shook Mr. Hoffman's hand with confident familiarity. "Let's get started," he said, not bothering to greet me as he took a seat across the table. Mr. Hoffman cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses as he opened a leather portfolio. "First, let me express my deepest condolences again. Robert and Eleanor were not just clients but dear friends. This is difficult for all of us." He removed several documents, arranging them meticulously before continuing. "I'll be direct, as I know this is a painful time. I have here the last will and testament of Robert and Eleanor Reynolds, dated 18 months ago, which supersedes all previous versions." My brow furrowed. Previous versions? I hadn't known there had been multiple wills. "The document is quite straightforward," Mr. Hoffman continued, his eyes fixed on the papers rather than meeting my gaze. "Robert and Eleanor have left their entire estate, including the family home, all financial assets, Robert's ownership stake in Reynolds Accounting, and all personal property, to their son, Alexander Reynolds." The words didn't register immediately. I waited for the continuation, for my name to be mentioned, for my portion of the inheritance. The silence stretched. "I don't understand," I finally said. "What about me?" Alexander's smirk widened as Mr. Hoffman finally looked up, discomfort evident in his expression. "There are no provisions for you in this will, Madeline." "I'm sorry." "That's impossible," I said, my voice rising slightly. "There must be some mistake." "There's no mistake," Alexander interjected, his tone smooth and practiced. "It's all perfectly legal." Mr. Hoffman slid a document toward me. "There is an explanation included in the will. Perhaps you'd like to read it yourself." With trembling hands, I took the paper, my eyes searching frantically until they landed on the paragraph. "We leave our entire estate to our son, Alexander, who has remained by our side, cared for us in our time of need, and maintained the family business that has been our livelihood. While we love our daughter Madeline, she has chosen to build her life elsewhere, and we respect her independence and success, which is reward enough." My mind reeled back to conversations over the years, times when Dad had casually mentioned, "Of course, you and Alexander will split everything down the middle when the time comes," or Mom saying, "We're so proud of both our children equally." Had I imagined those exchanges? "This can't be right," I whispered. "They wouldn't do this." "They did," Alexander said flatly. "Because they finally saw the truth. I stayed. I helped. I was there. You left and barely looked back." "That's not fair," I protested, turning to Mr. Hoffman. "This isn't what they wanted. They told me." "The will is legally binding, Madeline," Mr. Hoffman interrupted gently. "It was signed and witnessed properly, with both Robert and Eleanor of sound mind at the time. Were they? I challenged. Because this doesn't sound like them at all. Alexander's face hardened. What's that supposed to mean? It means something isn't right, I said, my journalist's instincts flaring despite my shock. Mom and Dad wouldn't have cut me out completely. Not without talking to me. Maybe they tried, Alexander said coldly. But you were always too busy with your important career to pick up the phone or visit more than twice a year. That's not true, I argued, even as guilt surged within me. I called every week. We talked regularly. Phone calls, Alexander scoffed. While I drove them to doctor appointments, fixed things around their house, included them in my family's life. Where were you when Dad had his first health scare last year? Or when Mom needed help after her fall? What fall? What health scare? I asked, genuinely confused. They never told me about any of that. Exactly my point, Alexander said, standing abruptly. They stopped telling you things because you made it clear your life in Chicago mattered more than they did. Tears burned behind my eyes. That's not fair, and you know it. Mr. Hoffman cleared his throat uncomfortably. Perhaps we should take a moment. No need, Alexander interrupted. Everything's clear. The house needs to be emptied within 30 days, Madeline. I've already started boxing your things. He turned to Mr. Hoffman. Is there anything else we need to discuss? Mr. Hoffman shook his head, looking pained. The paperwork for transferring the titles and accounts is prepared. We can handle that now if you'd like. Perfect, Alexander said, not sparing me another glance. I sat frozen, unable to process what was happening. My parents had left me nothing. Worse than nothing, they had left words that cut to the bone, suggesting I hadn't cared enough, hadn't been present enough. And Alexander had known. The lack of surprise on his face told me everything, he'd known exactly what was in that will. I rose on unsteady legs. I need some air. Neither man moved to stop me as I stumbled from the room, down the hallway, and out into the parking lot where finally, alone in my rental car, I allowed the tears to fall. The drive back to my parents' house, Alexander's house now, passed in a blur. My mind cycled through confusion, disbelief, and a growing anger that made my hands shake on the steering wheel. By the time I pulled into the familiar driveway, I had convinced myself there had to be an explanation beyond what appeared on the surface. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the home looked both familiar and strangely altered. Family photos still lined the hallway, but several moving boxes now cluttered the normally tidy living room. I followed the sound of movement to my bedroom, where I found Catherine, Alexander's wife, efficiently packing my belongings. "Oh," she said, clearly startled to see me. "You're back earlier than we expected." I stared at the scene, my childhood desk emptied, dresser drawers pulled open, clothes folded into neat piles and placed in cardboard boxes labeled Madeline's things. "What are you doing?" I asked, though the answer was painfully obvious. Catherine at least had the grace to look uncomfortable. Alexander thought it would be helpful to get a head start. He said you'd want to take these back to Chicago. Did he also tell you he's inherited everything? That I've been left nothing? The words tasted bitter in my mouth. She wouldn't meet my eyes. It's not my place to get involved in family matters. We are family, I said. Or at least I thought we were. Catherine set down the yearbook she'd been about to pack. I should let Alexander explain his side of things. His side? What about my parents' side? Did they tell you they were planning to disinherit me? She hesitated just long enough for me to catch it before saying, I really shouldn't discuss this. You knew, I realized. You all knew, and no one told me. Madeline, please, Catherine began, but I was already backing out of the room, suddenly needing space from this woman who had been my sister-in-law for 8 years, who had called me for advice about anniversary gifts for Alexander, who had shared Christmas mornings and birthday celebrations with me. I retreated to the kitchen, the heart of my childhood home where Mom had taught me to bake snickerdoodles and Dad had helped with science projects at the table. Now it felt like foreign territory. I opened the refrigerator reflexively, finding it stocked with unfamiliar health foods and prepared meals that my parents would never have chosen. The sound of the front door opening announced Alexander's arrival home. I braced myself, squaring my shoulders as he appeared in the kitchen doorway. "I see you've made yourself comfortable," he said coldly. "This was my home too," I replied. "At least I thought it was." Alexander shrugged off his suit jacket, draping it over a kitchen chair with deliberate casualness. "Well, now it's mine. And Catherine and I will be moving in next month after some renovations." "You're not even going to keep it the same?" The thought of strangers' furniture replacing Mom's carefully chosen pieces, of different colors on the walls Dad had painted himself, felt like another violation. "Why would we? It's outdated and needs work." He pulled out his phone, glancing at the screen before smirking slightly. "Tom Peterson just called to congratulate me on the inheritance. Says the firm's client list alone is worth a small fortune." The casual way he discussed profiting from our parents' death sent a surge of rage through me. "Is that all this is to you? A windfall? They're barely in the ground." "Don't you dare question my grief," Alexander snapped, his composure cracking for the first time. "I was here for them every single day while you were off playing investigative journalist." I watched Dad struggle to climb the stairs after his heart attack. "I helped Mom after she fell and broke her hip." "Where were you?" "I didn't know about any of that," I insisted, genuinely shocked. "They never told me." "Because they didn't want to burden you," he said bitterly. "Poor Maddie, so important and busy. They didn't want to distract you from your precious career." "That's not fair." "If I'd known." "You would have what? Flown in for a weekend? Sent flowers? Then gone right back to your life in Chicago?" Alexander's voice rose. "I put my life on hold for them. I changed my career plans to work with Dad when he needed help. Catherine and I bought a house nearby instead of moving to New York like we wanted. We had Sunday dinner with them every single week for 10 years. So this is your reward?" I gestured around us. "Taking everything and leaving me nothing? Did you convince them to change their will?" Alexander's laugh was harsh. "They approached me, Madeline. Said they'd been thinking about it for a while. Dad wanted the business to stay in the family, and they both knew I was the only one who cared enough to preserve their legacy." His words cut deep, but something didn't add up. Mom and Dad would have at least told me if they were planning something like this. "We spoke every week." "And what did you talk about in those calls? Your exciting life? Your latest article? Did you ever really ask about them, really listen?" His eyes narrowed. "They stopped telling you things years ago because you never showed real interest." I opened my mouth to protest but found myself replaying our conversations. Had I dominated the calls with stories about my work? Had I rushed them off the phone when deadlines loomed? Had I missed subtle signs that they needed me? "When were you going to tell me they'd been sick?" I asked, my voice smaller. Alexander's expression hardened. "You had your chance to be part of this family, Madeline. You chose differently." From upstairs came the sound of Catherine moving around in my bedroom, continuing to pack away my life. "How long do I have?" I asked. "I'm being generous giving you a week," Alexander replied. "Legally, everything is mine now, including whatever's in that room." A week. 7 days to process not only my parents' death but also this profound betrayal, to pack up the remnants of my childhood, to say goodbye to the only home I'd known until college. That night, I lay in my childhood bed surrounded by half-packed boxes, staring at the ceiling I'd gazed up at thousands of times before. Photos I'd removed from the wall before Catherine could pack them lay spread across my comforter: family vacations, graduation, holidays, visual evidence of what I'd believed was a loving, normal family. Had I been so wrong? Had I failed my parents so completely that they felt cutting me off was justified? Or was there something else at play, something in Alexander's smug certainty that raised the journalist's red flags I'd learned to trust over years of investigating corporate corruption? Sleep eluded me as questions circled in my mind. By dawn, one thing had become clear: I wasn't going to accept this situation at face value. If my years as an investigative reporter had taught me anything, it was that official stories often concealed messy truths. And I had 7 days to uncover what really happened. Morning light streamed through my bedroom window as I formulated a plan. If this were one of my investigative pieces, where would I begin? With the people closest to the situation who might have insights the primary subjects, in this case, Alexander, wouldn't want revealed. I waited until Alexander left for work and Catherine departed for her yoga class before beginning my investigation. First stop, the Petersons next door, who had been my parents' friends for over 30 years. Martha Peterson answered the door in gardening gloves, her face lighting up before quickly shifting to sympathy. "Oh, Madeline. Come in, dear. We've been thinking about you." Her kitchen was warm and smelled of cinnamon, a batch of muffins cooling on the counter. She poured coffee and insisted I take a muffin before settling across from me at her round oak table. "How are you holding up?" she asked, genuine concern in her eyes. "Not well," I admitted. "Especially after yesterday's will reading." Martha's expression flickered, and I caught it immediately. "You knew about the will, didn't you?" She fidgeted with her coffee mug. "We heard rumors. Your father mentioned some changes last year, but honestly, we were surprised. It didn't seem like Robert and Eleanor." "When did you last see them?" I asked. Martha frowned. "That's another strange thing. We used to have dinner together at least monthly, but in the last year or so, they became increasingly difficult to pin down. Alexander always seemed to be speaking for them, saying they were tired, or not feeling well enough for company." "Did they seem ill to you?" "Your father looked thinner the few times we saw him, and your mother seemed anxious, somehow. But whenever we asked, they'd say everything was fine, just getting older." She hesitated. "To be honest, we wondered if they were avoiding us." "And Alexander? Was he around a lot?" "Constantly," Martha confirmed. "Always there, handling everything, speaking for them. At first, we thought it was wonderful how attentive he was, but eventually." "Eventually what?" "It began to feel controlling," she admitted. "Last Christmas, we stopped by with cookies, and Alexander practically blocked the doorway, saying they were resting. We could hear your mother in the background asking who was there, but he never told her." This wasn't adding up to the story Alexander had presented, of devoted son merely supporting aging parents. I needed more information. My next stop was my parents' longtime physician, Dr. Brennan, whose office was just a 5-minute drive away. I hadn't made an appointment, counting on the decades-long relationship between my parents and their doctor to get me in the door. The receptionist was sympathetic when I explained who I was, and Dr. Brennan agreed to see me during her lunch break. Her office was cluttered but comfortable, diplomas and family photos covering the walls. "Madeline," she said warmly, "I'm so sorry about your parents. That accident was a terrible shock to all of us." "Thank you," I said. "I'm trying to understand some things about their last year or two. There seems to be a lot I wasn't told about their health." Dr. Brennan's expression grew guarded. "I'm limited in what I can share due to confidentiality, even with next of kin." "I understand," I said. "But in general terms, were they seriously ill?" Alexander mentioned a heart attack and a broken hip that I never knew about. She frowned. "Your father had a mild cardiac event about 18 months ago, not a full heart attack, but concerning enough to warrant medication and lifestyle changes. Your mother did fall and fracture her hip about a year ago, requiring surgery and physical therapy." "And they fully recovered?" "Largely, yes. Your father's heart function improved with medication, and your mother regained most of her mobility, though she did use a cane occasionally." I processed this information. Serious health events, certainly, but not the dire conditions Alexander had implied. Did they ever express why they didn't inform me about these issues? Dr. Brennan hesitated. "This veers into personal territory, but I did ask about notifying you during your father's hospitalization. Alexander said he'd handle family communications and that you were in the middle of an important work project that couldn't be interrupted. My blood ran cold. And you accepted that? It wasn't my place to question family dynamics, she said defensively. Alexander was very involved in their care, attending every appointment, managing their medications. Every appointment? That seems unusual. Dr. Brennan shifted uncomfortably. In the last year, yes. He insisted on being present for all discussions about their health. At the time, it seemed like dedicated caregiving. And now? I pressed. She met my eyes directly. Now I wonder if I missed signs of something concerning. Your mother seemed increasingly withdrawn at appointments, deferring to Alexander on decisions I would have expected her to make herself. I thanked Dr. Brennan and left with more questions than answers. My next destination was clear, Reynolds Accounting, where my father had built his business over 35 years. The office manager, Linda Washburn, had worked with Dad for most of that time and might have insights into the business succession. Linda's face registered surprise when I walked in. Madeline. I didn't know you were still in town. Just for a week, I explained. I'm trying to understand some things about Dad's last year or two at the firm. Linda glanced around nervously. Alexander's not in right now. That's fine. I'd prefer to speak with you anyway. She led me to a small conference room, closing the door before sitting down. I was so sorry not to see you at the funeral reception. I wanted to pay my respects. There was a reception? This was news to me. Linda looked confused. At Alexander's house, after the service. Quite a few clients and friends attended. Another detail Alexander had forgotten to mention to me. Linda, when did Dad step back from the business? About 2 years ago, Alexander began taking over more of the client relationships. Your father said it was part of the succession plan. She lowered her voice. But between us, it happened very suddenly. 1 week your father was fully engaged, the next week Alexander had taken over his office and Robert was barely coming in. Did Dad seem ill? Not initially, no. Tired sometimes, but nothing alarming until after he'd already stepped back. Linda twisted her hands. The transition wasn't as smooth as Alexander makes it sound. Several longtime clients were upset about how it was handled. What do you mean? Alexander has a different approach than your father. More aggressive with investments, less personal with clients. Some clients requested to stay with Robert, but Alexander insisted he was taking over all accounts. She hesitated. A few left the firm entirely. Did my father know about this? I'm not sure. Alexander closely managed all communications with your father after he stepped back. My investigative instincts were now on full alert. I needed to find the family's longtime accountant, Victor Morris, who had managed my parents' personal finances for decades but had apparently been replaced recently. I found Victor at his new small office across town. His eyebrows shot up when I introduced myself. Robert's daughter. Please, sit down. His cluttered office was a stark contrast to the polished environment of my father's firm, but his warm manner reminded me of Dad. I'm trying to understand what happened with my parents' finances in the last couple of years, I explained. I understand you were no longer handling their accounts? Victor's expression darkened. I was abruptly dismissed about 18 months ago. Alexander informed me my services were no longer required and that he'd be handling their financial matters personally. Did my parents confirm this? That's what troubled me, Victor admitted. When I called Robert to discuss it, Alexander answered his phone and said your father was too busy to speak with me. I never got to talk to Robert directly about the decision. Victor hesitated, then opened a drawer and removed a folder. I probably shouldn't share this, but given the circumstances. These are some notes I made after reviewing their accounts before I was cut off. There were several large transfers from their retirement accounts that concerned me. The documents showed withdrawals totaling nearly $200,000 over 6 months, all authorized by Alexander with dual signatures from my parents. "Did you ever find out where this money went?" I asked. "No, but I had concerns it wasn't being used for their benefit." Their spending patterns hadn't changed, and no major purchases or investments were evident. Victor looked troubled. I tried to discuss it with them directly, and that's when Alexander terminated our relationship. I left Victor's office with copies of his notes and a growing sense of dread. My final stop that day was Happy Oak Senior Care, where a home health aide named Brenda Williams had assisted my mother during her recovery from hip surgery. Brenda was initially reluctant to speak with me, but softened when I explained my concerns. "Your mama was the sweetest lady," she said as we sat in the corner of a small cafe. "I was with her 3 days a week for about 4 months. How was her relationship with Alexander during that time?" Brenda chose her words carefully. "He was very present. Always checking what medications I'd given, what your mother had said during our time together." "Did that seem normal to you?" "Not entirely. Most family members are involved but give some privacy. Alexander would sometimes ask me to leave the room when certain topics came up." She lowered her voice. "Once, your mother was showing me old family photos, including several of you, and she became teary saying how much she missed you." Alexander came in and immediately changed the subject, put the albums away. "Did my mother ever mention why they didn't contact me about her surgery?" "That's the thing," Brenda said, leaning forward. "She thought they had. She specifically mentioned being disappointed you couldn't come home during her recovery but understanding because of some big story you were working on. When I asked if you'd be visiting soon, she said Alexander was handling all the communication with you because using the phone was difficult for her while on pain medication." My heart sank. "But he never called me about any of this." "I suspected as much," Brenda admitted. "And when I started asking questions, my assignment was suddenly terminated. Alexander said they no longer needed assistance." By the time I returned to my parents' house that evening, a clear and disturbing picture was emerging. Alexander hadn't simply been a devoted son stepping up for aging parents, he had systematically isolated them, controlled their communications, taken over their finances, and possibly manipulated them into changing their will. The final piece fell into place when I searched Dad's study that night, after Alexander and Catherine had gone out to dinner. Hidden in an old cigar box in the back of his desk drawer, I found a handwritten draft of a will dated just 2 years ago, dividing the estate equally between Alexander and me, just as my parents had always said they would. Something had changed dramatically in the months after that draft was written, and I was increasingly convinced Alexander was behind it. The question was, could I prove it? And what had happened to the $200,000 that had disappeared from my parents' accounts? The next morning, I waited until Catherine left for her boutique fitness studio before confronting Alexander. I'd spent half the night organizing my evidence, copies of financial records from Victor, notes from my conversations with Dr. Brennan and Brenda, and most damning of all, the handwritten will draft showing my parents' original intentions. Alexander was in the kitchen, scrolling through his phone while drinking coffee, looking completely at ease in the house he'd claimed as his own. "We need to talk," I said, dropping the folder of evidence onto the table in front of him. He barely glanced at it. "I'm heading to the office. Whatever this is can wait." "No, it can't. I know what you did, Alexander." Something in my tone made him look up, wariness crossing his features. "What are you talking about?" "I've spent the last 2 days talking to everyone who was involved with Mom and Dad in their final years, their doctor, their accountant, Mom's caregiver, their friends. And they all tell an interesting story about how you systematically isolated our parents, controlled who they spoke to, and managed all their communications, including with me." Alexander's jaw tightened. "You're being dramatic. I took care of them because you weren't here." "Did that care include intercepting my calls?" "Because Mom thought we'd spoken about her hip surgery I never knew about because you never told me." She was confused. "No," I cut him off. Brenda says Mom was perfectly lucid when she talked about how disappointed she was that I couldn't come home during her recovery, for a trip I was never invited to make because you never informed me she was injured. Alexander stood, his casual demeanor vanishing. You have no idea what it was like being here, dealing with everything while you lived your carefree life in Chicago. My carefree life where I called every week, only to be told by you that they were too busy to come to the phone half the time. Where I suggested visits only to be told by you that it wasn't a good time. You're twisting things. And what about the $200,000 that disappeared from their accounts right around the time they supposedly decided to cut me out completely? Victor Morris was quite interested in where that money went. Alexander's face flushed. Their money is none of your business. It is when I suspect you coerced them into changing their will. I pulled out the handwritten draft. Dad's original will divided everything equally between us. That was always their plan. Alexander snatched the paper, scanning it with growing anger. Where did you get this? Dad's study. Not everything was as well hidden as you thought. I leaned forward. What happened, Alexander? Gambling debts? Bad investments? What was so important that you needed to manipulate our parents and steal my inheritance? The sound of the front door opening startled us both. Catherine appeared in the kitchen doorway, her yoga mat under her arm, clearly having returned earlier than expected. What's going on? She asked, looking between us. Nothing, Alexander said sharply. Madeline was just leaving. I'm not going anywhere until you explain what happened to the money, I insisted. And why you kept me from knowing our parents were ill. Catherine set down her mat, confusion evident on her face. What money? Alexander, what is she talking about? Don't listen to her, he snapped. She's making wild accusations because she can't accept that Mom and Dad recognized everything I did for them. I turned to Catherine. Did you know Alexander was controlling their communications? That he never told me about Dad's heart problems or Mom's broken hip? That he intercepted my calls and told them I was too busy to visit when I never knew they needed me? Catherine's eyes widened. That can't be true. She looked to Alexander. Tell me that's not true. His silence was damning. And the money? I pressed. $200,000 withdrawn from their retirement accounts over 6 months. Where did it go, Alexander? Catherine paled. Alexander? His composure cracked entirely. You don't understand the pressure I was under, he shouted, slamming his hand on the table. The firm was struggling after Dad stepped back, his old clients were leaving, and I needed capital to keep things afloat. So you took it from our parents' retirement? Catherine whispered, horror in her voice. It was an investment in the family business, he insisted. I was going to pay it back. And cutting me out of the will? I demanded. Was that part of your investment strategy too? Alexander's face twisted with a mixture of shame and defiance. They were disappointed in you, Madeline. Always talking about how you never visited, never called. Because you told them I was too busy when they tried to reach me. You deliberately kept us apart. Catherine's voice cut through our argument. The lake house renovation. The new car. The country club membership. She stared at Alexander. That wasn't from bonuses, was it? It was their money. Alexander turned on her. Don't you start too. Everything I did was for our future. The firm would have collapsed. So you stole from your parents and lied to your sister? Catherine's voice rose with disbelief. And manipulated 2 elderly people into cutting their daughter out of their will? Who are you? I watched the realization dawn on Catherine's face, the same ugly truth I'd been piecing together over the last few days. The man she'd married, the father of her children, had systematically deceived and manipulated our entire family. I need to check something, I said suddenly, heading toward Dad's study with Alexander close behind. Stay out of there. Everything in this house is legally mine now. I ignored him, going straight to the old filing cabinet where Dad kept his most important documents. The bottom drawer had always stuck, you had to know the trick of lifting while pulling to open it. Inside, as I'd hoped, was a fireproof document box. "That's private." Alexander lunged for it, but I turned away, protecting the box with my body. "Dad always kept his original documents here," I explained to Catherine, who had followed us. "Copies went to the lawyer, but originals stayed home. He was old school that way." Alexander made another grab for the box. "Give me that right now." "What are you afraid I'll find?" I challenged, managing to open the lock with the combination I remembered, Dad's and Mom's anniversary date. Inside lay several folders. I quickly found what I was looking for, a will dated 3 years ago, properly signed and notarized, splitting the estate equally between Alexander and me. The will Mr. Hoffman had presented was dated only 18 months ago, right around when Alexander had taken control of their finances and begun isolating them. "This is their real will," I said, holding it up. "The one you manipulated them into changing." Alexander lunged forward, attempting to snatch the document. In the struggle, he knocked over Dad's desk lamp, which crashed to the floor. The commotion drew the attention of the neighbors, and moments later, there was pounding at the front door. "Everything okay in there?" called Mr. Peterson's concerned voice. We heard shouting and a crash. Catherine moved to answer the door while Alexander and I remained locked in our standoff, the original will clutched in my hand. "You won't get away with this," I said quietly. "Too many people already suspect something was wrong. The doctor, the accountant, Mom's caregiver, they all saw how you controlled everything." "It doesn't matter what they suspect," Alexander hissed. "The new will is legal. It's been executed. The assets are already being transferred. And when the police investigate the financial fraud? The elder abuse? How are you going to explain the $200,000? For the first time, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. "You wouldn't. It would destroy the family name, the business Dad built." "You already did that," I said as Catherine returned with Mr. Peterson. "You destroyed everything when you betrayed them. And me." Alexander's face contorted with rage. He lunged forward again, this time managing to grab the will from my hands. Before anyone could react, he ripped it in half. "It doesn't matter," he shouted triumphantly. "It's invalid now. The new will stands." Mr. Peterson stared in shock while Catherine covered her mouth with her hand. "That was just a copy," I lied smoothly, watching Alexander's face fall. "I already scanned everything and emailed it to my attorney this morning." It was a bluff. I hadn't actually contacted a lawyer yet, but Alexander didn't know that. His face drained of color as the implications sank in. "Get out," he said, his voice shaking with rage. "Get out of my house right now." "Alexander, stop," Catherine pleaded. "This has gone far enough." But he was beyond reason. I said, "Get out. Before I call the police and have you removed for trespassing." I gathered the torn will and the other documents I'd found, looking to Catherine. "I never wanted this. I just wanted the truth." Her eyes welled with tears. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know the extent of it." As I left my childhood home, perhaps for the last time, Alexander's final threat followed me: "You'll get nothing, Madeline." Nothing. But for the first time since the lawyer's office, I walked away with something invaluable, the truth, and evidence of Alexander's deception that would eventually bring justice not only for me, but for our parents whose trust had been so terribly betrayed. The morning after my confrontation with Alexander, I met with Patricia Ramirez, an attorney specializing in contested wills and elder abuse cases. Her office was in downtown Boston, a sleek, modern space that contrasted sharply with Mr. Hoffman's traditional suburban practice. "Based on what you've described," Patricia said after reviewing my evidence, "you have grounds to contest the will on the basis of undue influence. The pattern of isolation, controlling communications, and financial exploitation strongly suggests Alexander manipulated your parents during a vulnerable time." "What are my chances?" I asked. Patricia was refreshingly direct. "Contested will cases are challenging and expensive. We're essentially arguing that your brother created circumstances that overpowered your parents' free will, making them act in ways contradictory to their established intentions. She gestured to the original will I'd recovered. This earlier will helps our case, showing their long-standing intentions. The financial records showing withdrawals are concerning, but we'll need to definitively link those to Alexander's personal use rather than legitimate expenses for your parents. What's the timeline for something like this? Months, possibly a year or more, she admitted. And the costs will be significant. Do you have resources to pursue this? The question hit hard. My savings were modest, journalism rarely made anyone wealthy, and I'd need to return to Chicago soon or risk losing my job. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. I needed money to fight for the inheritance that should have been mine. I'll find a way, I said with more confidence than I felt. Patricia nodded. One more thing to consider, this will become public. Family secrets rarely stay hidden during inheritance disputes. I thought about what that meant, not just for Alexander, but for my parents' memory and reputation in the community where they'd lived their entire lives. I understand, I said finally. But I think the truth honors them more than Alexander's lies. Over the next week, unexpected allies emerged. Victor Morris, my parents' former accountant, offered to provide expert testimony about the suspicious financial transactions at significantly reduced rates. Your father was more than a client, he told me over coffee. He gave me my start in this business 30 years ago. I should have pushed harder when Alexander cut me off from their accounts. Dr. Brennan, though constrained by medical confidentiality, agreed to testify about Alexander's controlling behavior during appointments if subpoenaed. Most surprising was Martha Peterson, who showed up at my hotel room the day after Alexander had forced me from the house. We found these, she said, handing me a small box. Inside were birthday and holiday cards I'd sent my parents over the years, cards they'd apparently never received, with envelopes showing they'd been opened by someone else first. They were in your parents' recycling bin last year. Tom noticed your handwriting and thought it was strange they'd throw away your cards, so he rescued them. Alexander intercepted my mail to them, I realized, throat tightening with emotion as I looked through the cards. Each contained personal messages, updates about my life, expressions of love, communications Alexander had deliberately kept from our parents. We suspected something wasn't right, Martha admitted. Your parents were always so proud of you. The change in how they talked about you in the last year seemed manufactured somehow. Word spread quickly through my parents' social circle. Former neighbors, church friends, and my mother's book club members reached out with stories of how Alexander had gradually restricted access to my parents, always with plausible excuses about their health or schedule. Even my parents' pastor, Reverend Wilson, contacted me. Your mother specifically asked me to let you know if her health declined seriously. When I reminded Alexander of this after her hip surgery, he assured me he'd already spoken with you. I regret not following up directly. The community support bolstered my resolve, but Alexander wasn't sitting idle. 3 days after our confrontation, Patricia called to inform me that he'd filed a restraining order preventing me from entering his property, including the family home, and was spreading rumors that I'd abandoned our parents and was now trying to cash in. Several of your parents' friends have reported him making these claims at church and around town, Patricia explained. He's trying to control the narrative. That sounds familiar, I said bitterly. Meanwhile, I was burning through my savings staying at a hotel while pursuing the case. My editor in Chicago was sympathetic but firm. I needed to return to work or take unpaid leave. I chose the latter, knowing I couldn't properly fight this battle from another state. The first preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following week. As Patricia prepared our filings, I received an unexpected visitor at my hotel. Catherine. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her usual polished appearance disheveled. Can we talk? Over coffee in the hotel lobby, she revealed that she'd moved out with their children after discovering the extent of Alexander's deception. I found more evidence, she said, sliding a USB drive across the table. Financial records Alexander kept on his home computer. He wasn't just taking money from your parents, he's been gambling online for years. The firm is deeply in debt. Why are you giving me this? I asked. Catherine looked down at her wedding ring, which she still wore. Because it's the right thing to do. And because I need to show our children that truth matters, even when it hurts. The USB drive contained devastating evidence, spreadsheets tracking withdrawals from my parents' accounts directly to Alexander's personal accounts, emails showing he'd intercepted my messages to them, and most damning of all, a draft email to his gambling addiction counselor admitting he'd manipulated my parents into changing their will to cover his debts. This changes everything, Patricia said when I shared the evidence. We need to amend our filing to include financial elder abuse charges. 2 days before our hearing, Alexander's lawyer, not Mr. Hoffman, but a high-powered attorney from downtown, called Patricia with a settlement offer, 25% of the estate to avoid family embarrassment. He's feeling the pressure, Patricia noted. But this offer is insultingly low. Reject it, I said immediately. This isn't just about money anymore. The morning of the hearing brought another surprise. Alexander's gambling creditors had gotten wind of the inheritance and filed their own claims against the estate, adding another layer of complexity to an already tangled situation. In the courtroom, I saw Alexander for the first time since our confrontation. He looked haggard, the confident facade cracked. When our eyes met, his gaze dropped first. Catherine sat several rows behind him, separate but present. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, listened carefully as Patricia outlined our case, presenting evidence of Alexander's controlling behavior, the intercepted communications, and the financial exploitation. Alexander's attorney countered that my parents had made their decision freely, arguing that they had simply recognized Alexander's greater contribution to their care. When the financial records from Catherine were introduced, however, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted perceptibly. The judge's expression hardened as she reviewed evidence of funds moving from my parents' accounts directly to cover Alexander's gambling debts. Your Honor, Alexander's attorney began, these records were obtained without my client's consent and should be inadmissible. They were obtained by his wife from their shared home computer, Patricia countered. And they clearly demonstrate financial exploitation of elderly individuals, which goes far beyond a contested will case. The hearing concluded with the judge ordering a freeze on all estate assets pending further investigation and scheduling a full trial for 3 months later. Outside the courtroom, Alexander approached me, his lawyer trying unsuccessfully to hold him back. 25% was generous, he hissed. You'll regret not taking it. This was never about the money, I replied calmly. It's about what you did to them, and to me. As Alexander turned to leave, a man in an ill-fitting suit approached him. Mr. Reynolds? I'm with the district attorney's office. We'd like to ask you some questions about financial transactions involving your parents' accounts. The look Alexander gave me then was pure hatred, but beneath it, I glimpsed something else, fear. The house of cards he'd built was collapsing, and we both knew it. That evening, surrounded by cards and letters from my parents' friends offering support and sharing memories, I felt a strange mixture of vindication and profound sadness. I'd likely win the legal battle, but the cost had been devastatingly high. My parents were gone, my relationship with my brother shattered beyond repair, and a family business built over decades was teetering on the edge of collapse. Victory, I was learning, could feel remarkably like loss. The full trial never happened. 2 weeks after the preliminary hearing, faced with mounting evidence and the district attorney's investigation into elder financial abuse, Alexander's attorney reached out with a substantially revised settlement offer. Equal division of all assets, as your parents originally intended, Patricia explained as we reviewed the terms. Plus Alexander assumes full responsibility for his gambling debts rather than having them paid from the estate. And the legal admission of wrongdoing? I asked, having been clear this was non-negotiable for me. He's agreed to a statement acknowledging he unduly influenced your parents during a vulnerable time in their lives and intercepted communications between you and them. I sat back, processing this development. Why the sudden change? The DA is offering a deal, if he makes full restitution and acknowledges his actions, They'll recommend probation rather than jail time for the financial exploitation charges. Patricia gave me a measured look. Plus, Catherine filed for legal separation yesterday. I think he's realizing how completely his actions have isolated him. After 3 months of fighting, the settlement was finalized in just days. The family home, financial assets, and my father's stake in the now struggling accounting firm were divided equally between Alexander and me. More importantly, the truth about my parents' final years was officially acknowledged. The day the paperwork was completed, I stood in my parents', now partially my, living room, surrounded by the familiar furnishings that held a lifetime of memories. The house felt different somehow, emptier despite nothing having been removed. My phone rang, Catherine, checking on the final arrangements. It's done, I told her. Equal division, as it should have been. How are you feeling? She asked. Honestly? Hollow. I sank onto the sofa where Mom used to read. I won, but what did I really gain? They're still gone. But their true wishes were honored, she pointed out gently. That matters. I thought about my next steps. My unpaid leave from the Tribune had stretched longer than planned, and my Chicago apartment lease was ending. The family home was half mine, but living there felt impossible with all that had happened. Have you spoken to Alexander? I asked. Catherine's sigh carried through the phone. Briefly. He's not in a good place. The firm is failing, his reputation is in tatters, and the children are confused and hurt. He started gambling addiction treatment, though. That's something, at least. After we hung up, I wandered through the house, trailing my fingers over familiar surfaces, the dining table where we'd shared countless meals, the mantel displaying family photos I'd rescued from Alexander's purge, the backyard seen through windows where Dad had taught us both to play catch. An idea began to form, something that felt right in a way the legal victory hadn't. The next morning, I met with a financial advisor to discuss options for my inheritance. By afternoon, I had a plan. 1 month later, on what would have been my parents' 45th anniversary, I stood in the community center meeting room surrounded by their friends, former clients, and neighbors. The banner above read, the Robert and Eleanor Reynolds Memorial Scholarship Fund. My parents believed education changes lives, I explained to the gathered crowd. This scholarship will help local students who demonstrate the values they lived by, integrity, community service, and perseverance. I'd allocated a significant portion of my inheritance to establish the fund, ensuring it would provide educational opportunities for decades to come. The decision had felt healing in a way that simply taking my share never could have. The other major decision had been harder but equally right. Rather than selling the family home, I'd decided to renovate it as a community gathering space where seniors could connect, take classes, and receive support services. The Robert and Eleanor Reynolds Center would open its doors in 6 months, turning a house of painful memories into something that truly honored my parents' legacy. What surprised many, including myself, was my decision to reach out to Alexander. The legal battle had revealed the extent of his deception, but also the desperation behind it. The gambling addiction, the mounting debts, the fear of losing the business our father had built, none of it excused his actions, but it helped me understand them. My first attempt at contact was rejected outright. The second was met with suspicion. By the third, Alexander agreed to meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop halfway between his new apartment and the family home. He looked diminished somehow, the confident older brother of my childhood replaced by a man visibly weighed down by consequence and regret. "Why did you want to see me?" he asked immediately, skipping any pleasantries. "Because despite everything, you're my brother," I answered honestly. "And I think Mom and Dad would want us to try to find some way forward." Alexander's laugh was bitter. "After what I did? I find that hard to believe." "You hurt me deeply," I acknowledged. "You kept me from being there when our parents needed me. You lied, manipulated, and stole. I'm still angry about all of that." He flinched but didn't disagree. "But I've realized something important," I continued. "Holding on to that anger only compounds the loss. Mom and Dad are gone. I can't get back those final years with them, and neither of us can undo what happened. So what? We pretend everything's fine? One big happy family again? His tone was sarcastic, but I caught the undercurrent of pain. No. Trust takes time to rebuild, if it can be rebuilt at all. But I'm staying in Boston, Alexander. I've accepted a position as an investigative reporter with the Globe. We're going to be in the same city, with mutual connections. We can either remain enemies, or we can try to find a different way. That conversation didn't magically repair our relationship. Alexander initially rejected my offer to help with his gambling recovery, though Catherine later told me he'd mentioned our meeting in therapy. He declined to attend the scholarship fund launch but sent a small contribution anonymously, which I recognized by his distinctive check handwriting. Small steps. Tiny openings in a door that had seemed permanently closed. By Christmas, 1 year after our parents' deaths and 10 months after the devastating will reading, Alexander accepted my invitation to bring his children to see the holiday lights display at the newly renovated Reynolds Center. We didn't speak much, but watching his kids explore the house where their father had grown up felt like a tentative bridge across a still vast chasm. As for me, combining my investigative journalism experience from Chicago with a renewed connection to my hometown proved unexpectedly fulfilling. My first major series for the Globe focused on elder financial abuse and the legal systems that often fail to protect vulnerable seniors, inspired, of course, by my own experience, but reaching far beyond it to expose systemic issues and advocate for change. The painful journey from that devastating day in the lawyer's office taught me lessons I never anticipated. I learned that family bonds can be both incredibly fragile and surprisingly resilient. I discovered that justice and healing aren't necessarily the same thing, that winning a legal battle doesn't automatically heal emotional wounds. I came to understand that forgiveness isn't about excusing wrongdoing, but about freeing yourself from the corrosive power of unresolved anger. Most importantly, I learned that honoring those we've lost isn't about inheritance or possessions, but about carrying forward their values and creating something meaningful from even the most painful chapters of our stories. Standing in the garden behind what was once our family home and now served as a vibrant community center, I watched as Alexander awkwardly planted daffodil bulbs with his children as part of the Memorial Garden project. We were far from close, might never fully repair what had been broken, but we were both there, both trying in our own ways to make something better from what had been broken. Mom and Dad would have wanted that, I think, not the absence of struggle, but the courage to keep moving through it towards something that mattered. Have you ever faced a betrayal by someone you trusted deeply? How did you find your way forward? I'd love to read your stories in the comments. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that healing is possible even after profound loss and betrayal. Remember that whatever challenges you're facing, you have the power to write a new chapter. Thank you for being here with me today, and I wish you strength and peace on your own journey toward healing.